Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. It is 9:30 where I am, which means that it is time for the session to start. I'm going to give people a couple minutes, especially because I'm missing my co-chairs. Oh, there we go. Can someone confirm that you can hear me?
You can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
There we go. I can hear you guys too. Thanks.
Any insight on the location that's been chosen for IETF 113?
Yes, so there has been, the LLCJ specifically has been looking at different sites. I believe it has been made public that we are not considering Asia. And we're not considering North America either. So all I can say right now is that it will be most likely in Europe. That's probably not a lot of insight, but
no, they said that last week at the plenary.
Yeah.
We were hoping for the location in Europe.
Right. So I think the
more inside info.
Yeah, it's hard to say more inside info in a public forum being recorded and transmitted through YouTube and everywhere else. But yeah, so I believe that we're in the final phase of getting the contract signed and figuring that out. Things are changing, of course, in Europe all the time, and that's all I can say, I guess, right now. Yeah, so Antoine just said in the chat that the code cases are going up again in Europe. So yes, I don't know how that's affecting the negotiations because I'm not part of that. But yes, those are things that we're all keeping an eye on. So we got Martin. We seem to have lost John. Or he couldn't find the way here. Maybe this is the routing area. I don't know.
They had that side meeting on Multicast SR. Maybe that's where he is. I don't know. I didn't go either.
He was in that room, and they are overrunning.
So, Martin, what do you think? Should we start?
Do you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I think we should. But John should join us in a few minutes.
Yeah, I'm assuming there's probably other people, other routing people, not just other people, other routing people in that side meeting as well that will probably join us. So when we start with all the event trivia, this is the routing area open meeting. You can probably see me on the video. Martin can maybe show himself too, in case you don't know what we look like or have forgotten over the last couple of years. John is the other ID, and he should be here in a couple of minutes. You have all been aware of the note well, and hopefully you have all noticed that we, all the chairs of the different working groups, have been highlighting not just the IPR nature of the note well, but the parts that talk about the behavior and the conduct during the meetings. There are links here to the anti-harassment procedures, to the code of conduct. Please make yourself familiar with that. Make sure that whatever behavior that you display in the meetings, including all the virtual meetings, the Jabber or the Meet Echo instant messaging, that they all adhere to that. Some of the points in the code of conduct, which is RC 7154, are the ones here. The reason we're here, all of us, is to, of course, contribute to the ongoing work of the IETF, which is meant to make the Internet Grow work better. We're here to do engineering. Please focus on that. Focus on technical arguments. Focus on treating your colleagues with respect. English is the, I guess, de facto language of the IETF, and that's fine. Many of us don't speak English as a first language. So please be mindful of that as well. Speak slowly. Try to avoid slang, etc. We're always looking for feedback on how we're doing as ADs, not only what's going well, which is always nice to hear, but more importantly, what may not be going well, what may be broken with the area, or what things we could do better. Many of you hopefully saw a survey a few weeks ago. It actually concluded, I think, earlier this week, on a 360 evaluation experiment that we did for the AESG. So where you could have sent feedback about us specifically, the three of us as ADs. That was a good opportunity. If you want to talk to us individually, either directly or indirectly, if you want to tell John or Martin about me and you don't want to tell me directly, that's fine. Tell them. They can anonymize things. This is also a good time to talk to the NOMCOM about not just the candidates to become AD next time starting in March, but also about the ongoing work that we're doing. They also take care of anonymizing, if necessary, information and giving us some feedback. There's not a lot of feedback coming, but again, please bring it up. Tell us how we're doing and what can we do better. One of the things I think we can all do better is review documents. Please review documents while in the working group. Review all the documents that are yours, especially, so that we can increase the quality of the documents that not only are produced by the working group, that get out to the IESG and the rest of the IETF. This improves the quality and improves the process, of course. It makes it hopefully faster for everyone. So this is the agenda for today. It's the typical agenda. Some of this review at the top. We're going to have a routing director report, and then we're going to have some working group updates. Those 6 working groups are listed there, and we should have time at the end to for any for other discussion. Just one thing, Drew just posted in the chat that November 23rd is the deadline for community feedback to the NOMCOM. So please make sure you provide feedback there. Does anyone have anything to say about the agenda? Any comments? Anything you want to change, add? Okay, I guess that's a no. We only have 1 hour, so should as that we should still have time at the end. Not a lot changed, or not much changed. Nothing changed, to be specific in the area in terms of working groups within open, close, or recharter any of the working groups. Some because it was, I guess, summer and vacation time for many people. We're a little bit slow. Hopefully we can pick that up now towards the end of the year when the holidays come up. We don't have any new chairs. The last batch came at the last IETF. Quick reminder of who is responsible for which working groups. In case you don't know everything, all this information is of course in the data tracker as well. Okay, so we're going to go now to the routing director report. Hamian or Lucandre, I don't know which one of you is going to talk about this. There you go. Hamian, go ahead. We
Hello.
can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now, yes.
Oh, okay, thank you. So this is a report for the routing average error rate. And next page, please. Yeah, so this is again to the introduction page of our team, and it is composed by 43 now top experts, and all are appointed by ADs, and we are welcoming more people to contribute. And the purpose of the team is to provide the last call review to the drafts in the routing areas and other areas which are related with routing areas. We are also open to the early review of any working group document before a working group last call. So a wiki page is available as a hyperlink. Next page, please. So we have provided this kind of statistic information in the last 2 years, and for this explicit meeting IETF112, we are having a total of 15 drafts reviewed, including 4 early review and 11 last call review. And the right-hand figure is status of the request from each working group in last year and this year. And I think we have a few. The top working group is coming from the BES, the IDR, and of course we have also done a lot of work to review the other working groups' works. And next, please. So here is some review result of the review result, and basically we have 1/3 of them with ready, 1/3 with nits, 1/3 with some issues, and we feedback this to corresponding working groups to further discussion and before we proceeding to the IESG review. And on the right-hand side is some non-RTG area drafts review result, and I think half of them are having issues, and maybe 1/4 of them has needs, and some of them there are also 19% with ready status. So that is just a basic capture for the review work in last 3.5 months, and we are looking forward to see the ADs requesting more reviews, and we also expect our experts can help as much as possible. Thank you for all the experts, and that's my part.
Thank you, Hamian. Does anyone have any questions? So thank you for everyone in the routing directorate. This helps a lot. I know it helps me as an AD to get reviews from you guys. Don, go ahead.
So how does a draft in these pictures fit, like just into one category? Like I notice it adds up to 100%. So I would assume that, not ready and nits are not mutually exclusive, et cetera.
Hao-Ming, do you want to answer that? Or? I guess not. Honestly, I don't know.
Status. It comes out the worst status you. I mean, the worst status is the one that it gets logged in as the status of the draft. Like if it's not ready, that's the worst, and that's the one that gets logged. And in decreasing severity, that would be how the statistics are taken.
Thanks, AC. Jeff?
Okay. So a question to the directorate, since I haven't participated in it for a number of years. What would be the single biggest change you'd recommend for cleaning up the draft before it gets to you that you think the working group should do better about?
That's a good question. Personally, I've noticed that when I get some of the drafts, and this answer may be different from John and Martin, there are some basic things that could be checked. References, security considerations. I still see many drafts that say there are no security considerations. And while in some cases that may actually be true, it would be at least nice to explain why. There are none of them. There are basic things with IANA allocations. Maybe the IANA section is not complete, or the name of the registries are not well specified, or things along those lines that I think are easy or should be very low hanging fruit for not just the directorate but the working group to pick up. I would of course also expect that it wouldn't be us to the ones who find technical issues with the documents. That doesn't happen all the time, but it happens once in a while. And if they have gone through the review of the experts in the working groups, well, that you guys know a lot more than we do, so that shouldn't be the case. I don't know, John or Martin, if you want to add anything.
I thought that was a pretty good summary. I don't really have anything to add. Thank you.
Jeff, you want to follow up?
Same here. Thanks, Alvaro.
Yeah, so Jeff suggested on the chat that this sounds like a sort of a checklist. Yeah, maybe we can make a checklist. I am under the impression that maybe there's something in the wiki somewhere. I know that Adrian had done a presentation when he was AD about some of the things. Maybe we can dig that up and put it somewhere too.
Right. I mean, with checklist, I mean, I guess there's two things. One is, there's a bunch of things. One is having a good checklist. One is keeping it up to date. And one is actually getting people to use it at the appropriate time. And the getting people to use it seems like the hardest part. Like ideally, authors would actually go through and read the checklist for authors that already exist and act on them. And if they did, probably, most of the things that we catch in review wouldn't even happen because they're already in the checklist that the authors supposedly are reading through. So yeah, I mean, I'm like, are we not publicizing the checklist well enough? Are we not letting our authors know about them well enough? Are the checklists, too heavy and not usable by the authors? Like, all of this would be useful feedback.
I was thinking for just a minute, I got confused and I was like, oh, we already have the checklist. It's that long write-up list. When you do a write-up as a shepherd. it doesn't have everything you just mentioned, but I immediately thought of it, right? Because it goes, does it have an IANA section? Is that blah blah blah? Maybe the write-up should be done before the routing area review. I just went through this process with the IPsec, and it was very weird. I felt it was very weird that the chair asked me, as the author of the document, to write the write-up. But it wasn't an entirely horrible idea, because it actually, and that's what he said was, it sort of makes sure that all the stuff is there. Anyway, that's why I thought of that, I think.
Stuart?
It's a good point about, so Chris, just to follow up on that, it sounds like, as an author, you found that to be actually a better experience than you thought it would be. And like, will you ask your authors to do that also? Like, was it that good of an experience?
I don't know, but I think that it could possibly. Stuart, could you mute for a second, or Don? You too. I can hear myself. Yeah. So thanks. I don't know if I do the write-up, but it did bring to mind like having the checklist, right? And maybe just taking that was useful in that sense. Of course, I write write-ups a lot, so it was very easy for me. So I don't know if I would ask all the authors to do it. But
it just occurred to me that seems like a good way to get the authors to look at the checklist.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's exactly what I found, right?
And hopefully to also reduce the load on the shepherd, who presumably has to go through everything that the author put into the write-up anyway and verify it.
It wasn't a bad idea. We just have a lot of graybeards. I wonder if they'll scoff. What? Why do I have to do the write-up now? Anyway,
thanks.
Yeah.
So Stuart, you had gone off the queue. I thought you were next.
First off, it seems to me that before directorate get it, really ought to be reviewed by the shepherd, and that means to me a word-by-word review of everything and a complete list that every I is dotted and every T is crossed. I don't see why it would be otherwise. And if there's more questions that could be usefully added to the shepherd's report to make sure that some of these things are done, I think that would be a very useful reminder that this needs to be done. If the shepherd wants to pass some of it back to the working group, fine, but it shouldn't get to directorate without the shepherd having checked everything in detail.
Unless it's an early review, right?
Sorry, say again?
Oh, there's also the early review. I would assume that sort of goes before write-up.
Well, there's the chair's review that should also go through all this as well.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I thought the early review is to sort of catch like dumb ideas, or I don't know. I don't know what they're. We don't. If you look at LSR, we don't have any. So I don't.
It shouldn't really be going to any directorate until the chair has read every word and confirmed it's all okay. That's just basic chair duty 101, isn't it?
Don, you're up.
I mean, I guess we could talk about, what exactly is early directorate review for, and what do people, want to use it for? My own experience of it is that it's sort of like when the chair says, yeah, this thing is pretty close to being ready, but we want somebody outside of the group to review it and give it a sanity check. And that kind of review is pretty different from, sending it for last call review. So I agree, Stuart, with what you're saying about, if we're doing a direct review for last call, I'm not so sure about doing it for early review.
Yeah, I think a checklist would be great. I as an author, guilty of waiting till like the end type of thing, and then you do the NITS check, you do the submissions checks, and you put it in. And what I've done a number of Yang drafts recently, and I've been tripped up by the system, and even just like mechanical checks that I missed because they're not part of the submission process. But I think it would be a good mindset to just get people to do that earlier in the process.
So I pasted in the chat a couple of links. One, the most recent, to the ID guidelines, which is an ID checklist. In the ASG, we revised that a couple of months ago, so we republished a refreshed version of that. You might want to go take a look. And then I also posted another link to something called authors.itf.org, which is still in development. But the intent of that is to put a bunch of resources in there, not just checklists, but also authoring tools, how to do the XML, and stuff like that. You might want to take a look at that. AC, go ahead.
One thing that this isn't true of all the drafts, but when you get one that doesn't, it's kind of annoying, especially when it's one that isn't a routing one for a working group you don't follow. Is if you get a draft and it starts right in without saying what problem it solves and having kind of an overview with appropriate references to other documents real early on in the beginning. And I think it would be good if every draft had that. I know that's hard to do because I don't know how many I've seen is, you have like the abstract repeated, and then they start right into encodings and then how it works, and you kind of have to reverse engineer a more detailed overview than what's in the abstract. That's just one thing that I find happens sometimes.
Yeah, we do get a lot of comments, AC, around those lines from reviewers who are not only non-routing reviewers, but as you said, people who don't follow a specific working group. Because yes, sometimes we as authors assume that everyone knows what we know, and we just write the solution, put this bit there and send it, right? And so yes, I think that providing some background would be useful.
References right up front, because I don't expect somebody who's doing, most of our documents now are not something brand new. They're enhancements to existing protocols or solutions. So, but just to have the references right up front, so you could look at them before. You could have it in another window, so you could consult it as need be while you're reviewing it.
Great, good discussion. Anything else? Anyone want to bring anything else up before we go into the working group updates? And we're going to start with Babel. Donald?
Hi there. I'm Donald Eastlake, one of the chairs of the Babel Working Group. Next slide. So it's one of the smaller working groups, perhaps, in terms of number of drafts and things like that. People who aren't familiar with it should know it's distance vector routing protocol, but augmented with mechanisms to avoid loops or count to infinity or anything like that, and also to avoid starvation. So it has been proven to be quite effective in a number of instances. it has various motherhood and apple pie. It's simple, robust. It's been uh, implemented multiple times and multiple open source implementations. Seems to be pretty robust against bad behaved networks and some level of routing, some level of implementation and errors, extensible. It particularly seems to be effective in networks where you have at least some links with unstable metrics. These are typically radio links or overlays consisting of like intercontinental overlays with like zillions of tunnels involved. So you get the combined instability of all of these things. Has been deployed in a number of cases, and it seems to be effective in small and managed networks also. Next slide. Not supposed to spend much time on documents, but people should be aware initially there were 3 experimental RFCs documenting it. It was selected as the HomeNet working group mandatory to implement routing protocol. So it was decided to standards track it, and the core standards track documents have all gone through. 8966 is the primary one on the routing protocol. There's a couple security ones on one for authentication, one using DTLS for encryption and authentication. The basic information model is through, and source-specific extensions, so you can have routing that depends on the source as well as the destination. Next slide. So what's going on currently? What's happening there? Yang data model is almost through. It's in the RFC editor's queue, and work that's really happening. It's been extended so that you can route IPv6 even with routers that have no IPv6 address. So you can have the next hop for your IPv4 routes inside your router network be IPv6 addresses. And it seems to be pretty nifty. Draft is currently in AD evaluation. The most complex question that came up with that, I think, was what to do about the need to possibly issue ICMPs from a router, version 4, IPv version 4 ICMPs from a router that has no IPv4 address. And if there's really no IPv4 address around, there is, at least experimentally, one can use the dummy IPv4 address that actually has been allocated and is in the IANA IPv4 special uses IPv4 address registry, which is 192.0.0.8, if you're wondering. And the work which is kind of getting restarted is a delay-based metric for the routing protocol. It's used based on actually, you notice in the file name there, it's RTT, round trip time. And there is another topic in the charter which we haven't done any work on, which is multicast. And it's partly because this working group has a informal but very strong policy of not even really adopting drafts unless it's been implemented and deployed, at least limited deployment and shown to work. So there seems to be a little demand currently for multicast routing, and it hasn't been implemented or deployed. So really no work has started on that, even though it is an option in the charter. Next slide is the last one. This just gives a little bit more. I already kind of said what was going on with IPv4 via IPv6, and just a little more on the round trip time. You would imagine that that would be unstable and lead to routing oscillations and all kinds of things, but as documented in the draft, which is currently expired but expected to be reactivated, there are various techniques and hysteresis and so forth, which have found to be very effective at damping that. And in actual deployment, it's been proved to work extremely well. So nobody completely understands why it works so well. And if there's anybody on this call who's has some expertise in dynamic system stability and things like that, and would like to look into this and perhaps work on a little section or appendix or whatever in the protocol that explores why the specific methods in the draft have been demonstrated to work so well, the working group would welcome that. And that's the end of my report.
Chris, you have a question?
Yeah. So having had to write a comparison draft a while back between Babel and ISIS for HomeNet use, I'm curious how that's gone. Have you seen deployment of Babel in the HomeNet scenarios, like in like gateways at the home?
I'm not aware of a particularly widespread deployment there, but I actually haven't been too focused on that. Most of the uses involve, radio meshes, overlays, and other uses of that sort. There are people who have Babel running in their home. How many of them are non-implementers of Babel? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything either in terms of deployments.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. So we're going to move to Mini. Ronald. Ronald, I thought I saw you get on, but I don't see you anymore. I don't know if Ronald is still there. I saw him earlier. Ronald, yes, you're there.
We could always move to the next one and come back.
It says cannot unmute myself, so yeah, we're gonna go forward. I actually am gonna skip to IDR. I got a request from one of the chairs that they have to go. Where is IDR? And then we're gonna come back. So, okay, Jeff, go.
Hello. So at the request of the ADs, this is more about the kinds of things we're doing in IDR rather than endless litany of way too many documents that we all have to stare at. So for IDR and for BFD, we try to keep our status current in the wiki. This is as much for the fact that we have enough work going on and we are older and can't keep things straight that lets us keep track of it ourselves. So in terms of interesting work that's been happening across IDR in the recent couple of months, so we've been having a lot of work in BGP LS extensions. BGP link state is where we advertise link state type things across BGP in a somewhat abstracted way. Very helpful for traffic engineering, and it's become very popular for Spring. So we've been seeing a lot of SR type things that have been going in there. The other thing that's been sort of at the top of IDR mind has been things related to BGP FlowSpec. FlowSpec is the feature that allows us to send effectively firewall components inside of BGP. And it's a original use case for us for protecting routers across your network with a common set of firewall rules distributed the protocol. We had to BIS the base RFC, which was originally 5575, to clear up a number of lingering nits. But part of what the work that we did there effectively gave us consensus on is that the protocol, we can't safely extend the match conditions that are passed around in the protocol. The fields are, in many cases, type value rather than type length value. This is perhaps a general lesson for IETF that if you have a binary serialization of stuff, stick to the TLV. That's going to be the best answer no matter what. This is sort of unfortunate because there's been a lot of interest over the last several years about extending FlowSpec for various things. And we have things like FlowSpec for layer 2. We have FlowSpec for other types of overlay, underlay, and tunnel type situations happening. And we're also seeing that people are finding our encodings useful for other things, like PSEP, for example, has decided to leverage the FlowSpec NLRI encodings for putting together firewall rules. We're also seeing like DetNet is having interest in making use of it for their purposes. We're expecting to see that FlowSpec v2 is going to be there to try to solve some of these problems. That initial work is being kickstarted by Sue Harris and Donald Eastlake. So we'll be having some interims on that hopefully before end of year. And the idea is to try to actually get that done at a fairly quick pace, because the core of the technology is understood, but the needs for future encodings is necessary. Next slide, please. So other thing that's of interest is that we're starting to see a lot of cross-working group and area bleed over for various technologies. One of the ones that's impacting IDR specifically is a lot of multicast related things. The working group chairs for BESS and IDR are talking about how we can best coordinate this sort of things with some help from the ADs. The answer is we don't know what this really looks like. We don't have strong process in IETF to govern this sort of thing. So we'll be figuring out partially as we go along. Minimally, what we expect to see is we'll be building up a manifest of the various documents that are interacting, and then trying to get them tracked in a single place where everybody can see what's going on, and very likely try to find some interested parties that want to help with the coordinated effort. Another piece of work that we have going on is that we have auto configuration for BGP. It's been sort of stumbling around for the last couple of years. We're making some steady progress on it. The design team requirements document is complete. We've been discussing and re-reviewing the existing proposals for the protocol, based on how they fit into the requirements. There's a good chance we'll have another interim before end of year, and we're probably very close to starting to move into the protocol selection phase. Next slide, please. So we're also making progress against the BGP Yang. Unfortunately, part of the headache we're running into is that over the very strange lifetime of this document, we've effectively steadily merged in all of the IDR chairs along with Mahesh, and we're all very busy on our various other things, so we haven't made as good as forward progress as we would have liked. We do have this being tracked largely in Mahesh's GitHub. If this were the current day stuff, we'd probably move it over to the IETF one, but this is where it currently lives. You're welcome to go there and look at the issue tracker and participate with us if you'd like. The work began with the open config model and has been steadily getting altered, basically to suit more IETF purposes. Open config is much more targeted use cases for the operators, whereas the IETF agenda is that we have to have much more broad coverage in terms of what components we're willing to service and what our extensibility models look like. And the phases of this work will be familiar to anybody that's done a very large Yang module, and especially one that's interacting with a lot of stuff. The first phase of just simply making sure all the content's in there, we think that's done. There are certain features that we're not intending to put in there, BGP being a protocol with many extensions. We can't put everything in the core document, but what's core and not core is a point of debate depending on the vendors. The restructuring and cleanup of the structure for the contents and the features is largely done as well. This has been important for things, what we're generally calling interwork. We have things like policy, our interactions with the routing config module, use of components like BFD, and this ties into the sort of flip side of things. Not only do we need to be able to use all these external components, the BGP work is going to be heavily reused by other things. So, our various rib modeling, a lot of our data structure type things like extended communities, all have to be put into structures so that they can be imported into other modules without a huge amount of copy and paste. And we have to be very clear about what our IANA maintenance looks like for things. And as a particular example, maintaining the extended communities stuff is going to be a very interesting challenge. We're hoping to get this stuff done by end of year, in terms of the full content, and then hopefully move forward to IETF, working group last call by spring. Next slide, please.
That's it. That's your last slide for IDR. Okay. Any questions? If there are no questions, do you want to go and take care of BFD as long as you're here?
Yep, might as well.
Any questions for Jeff for IDR? Okay, so let's do BFD.
Okay. BFD is both a little bit easier and more interesting problem at the end here. The working group is quiet. Greg Mercy was encouraged to take the BFD protocol and taking a plumbing that might be interesting for non-core use cases for BFD and take it off to routing working group. And we saw the presentation of that, I think, last IETF. And this means a lot of the churn of new things going to BFD has slowed down a little bit. So we're mostly focusing on driving existing work to completion. We have a document that is basically for one-sided BFD, example BHB or static next hops. That's hopefully going to be moving off to ISG publication very shortly. We have a feature that allows us to leverage BFD echo type procedures without actually having BFD present. This originally came to us by a broadband forum, and we have some interested people that are wanting to do a cleaner IETF document for this, and that will hopefully also hit working group last call soon. There's a feature for BFD to send large packets to basically do MTU probing. The core protocol was mostly done for async mode. We've had a request to integrate some echo mode as well, so that work still needs to happen. And the last cluster of things that we had in the open work was we had three features intended to make authentication both more usable, lighter weight, faster, and some extent more secure. At the moment, it's gated on a specific feature document that needs some help from L&D Gok, who's volunteered to help us with finding some lightweight hashes, how we can integrate that to BFD. And once that's actually been cleared through, we'll probably ship that cluster very quickly. BFD being a plumbing protocol, a good chunk of what we actually see is work that's happening in other working groups. BFD being used for X purpose, and the working group exists for BFD partially to help with review for those other proposals. So we're expecting to see reviews come in sometime, over the next couple of months, since a lot of these individual proposals seem to also be close to their own working group last calls. Next slide, please.
Before we go there, Greg is in the queue. Greg, do you want to say something about this slide?
I think that there is some confusion about BBF being interested in this echo. So it was discussed, and it's, as I understand it, yes, it's being mentioned in one of the published documents, BBF, but now it's not the case. So basically, there is no interest from BBF in this work.
Yeah, the impression I have is that BBF does not want to be in the business of standardizing BFD, but TR-146, which was the very loosely worded proposal they had, is pretty well implemented, as I guess, in BBF users. So having this cleaned up in IETF seemed like is a good idea, and minimally doesn't hurt. Okay, Greg is no longer in the queue. So the thing that's been keeping, unfortunately, way too many of our lives busy, BFD has a Yang module that just finished RFC. Well, that's yay. We actually got that done. Being a plumbing protocol, BFD was sort of in an interesting position, much like the routing config module, policy module, a few other modules. We want to make sure that people can use the features easily. And the discussion that we'd had, very back in the early design days, is we're going to have a Yang grouping that allows us to have a common configuration experience for BFD. That was under the client config params. And the sort of challenge that we have, with being IETF, we're intended to be largely vendor neutral. When we can model things in a neutral way, we should. And BFD has two standard ways of being configured. First one's a centralized mode where you have sort of a protocols BFD session where you configured all of your sessions, your parameters, your endpoints. And at that point, you just simply tell your clients, BFD is enabled for this particular purpose. It's a simple binary value. The other common way for doing configurations is that the session parameters are part of the client configuration. So in that circumstance, your BFT configurations, maybe for BGP and OSPF, would have them inline in your configuration stanza. The problem that we had was sort of realized as a very last second thing. This work was done quite some time ago. The RFC happened, and we started doing our audit on BGP's use of things. See prior slide. And one of the things that was noticed in the tree expansion was that we have the per client things, and being a long time since we actually worked on it, I couldn't remember what we actually did. So I pushed the panic call button off to the other documents that were impacted by the BFT RFC, which are currently in queue, which are OSPF, PIM, and ISIS. And after going through the panic, we did eventually dig up the old details of the conversation. Normally, if you have this sort of thing, the original proposal was that we just simply allow the vendors to do deviations to shut off the necessary nodes for client configurations. Trouble is, since that conversations happened, the desire of IETF to do this sort of thing via deviations has gone away. So we're in the process of trying to see if we can actually cleanly patch in, the use of the Yang feature modality, and that allows us to sort of cleanly support it without requiring an individual vendor to ship out a deviation set. Now, this is part of the netconf protocol, in terms of what features you support, and it's a cleaner way to do things. What this is required is some discussion among the BFT authors, the Yang doctors, and such, primarily because we would be making a change to the published 9127, but it's just gone out the door a few weeks ago. We're not expecting anybody's actually implemented 100% of things, and the proposal that we're having is that just simply add if feature to the impacted client configs, update 9127, and no changes are required by the impacted modules. So this has been an interesting lesson in getting this stuff right for cross-module use is challenging, and what the maintenance challenges are going to be. Didn't intend to push this as a test case so early in this process, but there we have it. And that said, we apologize to all the impacted modules, for basically shaking the tree so early.
Thanks, Jeff. We're going to move back to see if Ronald can make it now. Ronald?
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can. We are sort of running out of time, so
okay.
We have 3 working groups. Thanks.
In that case, next slide. So I just heard that this is old news. You already knew that Don Fedek was my co-chair. So next slide. The Money working group at the moment is mostly working on DLAP extensions, dynamic link exchange protocol extensions. There's a group of internet drafts centered around flow control, the modem or radio flow controlling the router, not the other way around. This was the original idea, but the assumption now is that the radio links will have lower capacity than the piece of Ethernet between routers and modems. So it's one way. There is already a sort of XOF solution documented in RFC 8651. This one is supposed to be more sophisticated and is supposed to not completely stop the router from sending packets to the modem if it's done in a more clever way. So you can keep a minimum flow going if you signal in time. These drafts are currently under transport area review, and and they should be coming out of that by early December. There has been some discussion on how this is going to be implemented on the router side. For instance, if you have a Linux-based router, if you can use any of the existing queuing disciplines, or you would have to write a new one. And if anyone is familiar with that and has ideas, that would be most welcome. There's one of this pack that's trailing behind, and that's sort of an alternative to the diff-serve-aware approach, which is in the drafts currently under ART review. And that's where you use the 802.1q header to distinguish flows from one another. Next slide, please. We have some individual drafts at the moment from Henning Roge, 3 of them. These are centered on physical layer parameters. There is some discussion ongoing what the router is supposed to be doing with that, whether it actually makes sense to provide this information. That's discussion that should take place on the mailing list. However, I think the radio band thing is useful in my personal view. I expect working group adoption, at least of that one, maybe also the general utilization. The radio quality is more iffy, but that's largely based on the views of very few people, and we need to have more reviews. And that's a general problem, getting people to review other people's drafts. Next slide, please. Then there are some things that are on our charter, our current charter, that we should be working on, but that work is not actually happening at the moment. One of the items is multicast in manage as a continuation of the simplified multicast forwarding work that has been done in the past. There's also a charter item on management of Manage and how this is different from your standard management in the face of frequent splits and merges of your network. And actually, we are eyeing the asynchronous management architecture, or it will have a new name. But this is being presented right in the next time slot to the Money Working Group by Ed Durain, who has sort of invented this. Then we still have responsibility for the maintenance of OLSR v2. Maybe not everybody knows it, but in addition to ISIS and OSPF, there is a third standards track link state protocol in the IETF. It's called OLSR, Optimized Link States Routing. And it's for Manage, of course. And we ran into a practical issue during some large interoperability event where there was a problem with routers rebooting and then being unable to join the network again. There are some ideas on how to solve that, not by a protocol change, but by some practical guidance on configuration. It would be good to write it up. And furthermore, there is back to DLAP again, there's a need or a perceived need to write some implementers guidance or clarification document. However, the people best placed to do this at the moment don't have the time right now. So we're looking if somebody else can pick this up. There might be some DLAP related work coming our way from the ROL working group, or maybe not, we will see. And then there is a pet subject of mine that's not covered by the current charter, and that is a Federation of Heterogeneous Minds. Next slide, please. That's it.
Thank you, Ronald. We're pretty much out of time. We're gonna skip the questions because, as Ronald said, his working group is meeting in the next slot. So please join. We're gonna stay here for another maybe 10 minutes to cover the last two working groups. So if you guys can please stay, that would be great. Dominique, go ahead.
Hello. So my name is Dominique Bartel, and I'm one of the co-chairs of ROLL with Michael Richardson acting as a secretary. Next slide, please. So the ROLL working group focuses on IPv6 routing for constrained devices and networks. We're talking about devices that have 50K of memory and up, so not megabytes of RAM. And networks such as low power radios with data rates in the 100K bits per second and up. That could be radios, can be also power line communication. Ron, oh yeah, good, thank you. So that's the kind of networks we're interested in. And the use cases are smart metering, smart cities, smart buildings, factory floor automation, etc. So basically our day-to-day work is to specify, maintain, improve the various flavors of our routing protocol, which is called RPL, RPL. And the working groups we interact with mostly, I would say, although it's not binary, are 6LoW LWIG in the INT area, about IPv6 adaptation for low power and lossy networks, lightweight implementation guidance, profiling protocol stacks for implementation on constrained devices. 6ish is a synchronous mesh network over IEEE 15.4 radios, RAW, ANIMA, etc. Next slide, please. So what we've done over the years in 2012 was the specification, the RFCs specifying the original version of RPL as a distributed, proactive, distant vector routing protocol. The protocol is oriented towards the dominant traffic flows, which is from sensors up to collection point, or so that's the up direction, or down from the control room to actuators. That's the down direction. And so we built a topology that's oriented along this major traffic. And we are trying, so upward routing is default routing, and going down, we have two flavors. One is source routed from the root, and the other flavor is hop by hop routing using routing tables. We strive to have minimum control traffic, and we achieve that by several means. For example, if we only do collection going up, so we don't nodes that don't need to be destinations don't even advertise themselves in the topology, and also we slow down the control traffic if the topology is stable using a trickle algorithm. So the network goes quiet if everything is stable. So that was a base flavor of RPL. Then we added multicast. We added optimized point-to-point routing across the DAG structure. You can always reach a destination going up the DAG and down, but that might be suboptimal. So we have specified one flavor of that, optimal point-to-point routing, and we're still working on another flavor. We've also looked at compression. We're still looking at compression of the routing headers because 6LoWPAN provides compression of the headers of the data packets, but the routing control packets still convey prefixes and addresses, and we want to compress IPv6 addresses that we want to compress. Next slide, please. So that was the background, and now what we're doing is, okay, to save on time, I'll just pick the reactive point-to-point flavor of RPL using an AODV algorithm, which allows to do reactive routing as opposed to the proactive of the original version. We're also working on projecting routes into the network in when we have routing tables from a central controller, and that entails adding control messages, adding options to be able to detect the radio links that are available to build a topology that is not aligned to the DAG structure. Next slide, please. We have some other work ongoing, selecting parents up the DAG such that they have good properties, like they have common grandparents. That allows to set the path for doing packet replication and elimination along parallel pathways to the root to add redundancy and reliability. And okay, at the bottom we have two more individual submission. I'll just keep over it in the interest of time. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominic. So we are way over. AC, it's up to you, and Chris, if you want to go over or if you want to leave this for the next IETF, as it's being discussed in the chat. The slides are going to be posted anyways in the data tracker if people want to go take a look at that.
AC, I would like to just tell everybody about the new flooding thing that we're looking at. What do you think?
I'll just go through them quickly.
Okay.
Next slide. No, go to it. I made these fucking slides. This is, you know, LSR is the merger of the former OSPF and ISIS groups. We realized we were doing a lot of common things together and brought them together. It's OSPF v2 and which is only for limited to IPv4, and then we got ISIS, which is a dual stack protocol. We got OSPF v3, which also is a dual stack protocol, and with the extended LSA extensions, it's now completely extendable. You could really do whatever you want and advertise LSAs at whatever granularity, but with great flexibility. There's a lot of design considerations. Next slide. One of the main things we've been working on for the last few years is segment routing. We have it for both the MPLS data stream and the SRv6 data stream. It has all the signaling for all the different types of SIDs, as well as how routes are computed with those SIDs. We're pretty much done with MPLS. The SRv6, we have drafts for those. The ISIS is almost done. There's some work on implementations for OSPF v3, and there's a disagreement. It's being held off, but hopefully by the next IETF we'll have OSPF v3 done as well. Next slide. Flex algorithm. This is pretty exciting work, and it really allows you to dynamically define constraints based on a lot of, initially it'll be different types of metrics, different admin groups. In other words, those are like SRLG groups for different routes. So you could effectively have, depending on prefix, multiple planes. Now, what's really nice about this is you can do different algorithms for different prefixes, yet you only have to have one forwarding plane. Whereas in the past, you know, some of the other things where you're doing different things in different, for different topologies like MTR, which I'm not saying the two are the same, but you had to, you know, most people implemented with different fibs. And so it's a pretty powerful thing. And now that we have this, we're having proposals to add constraints based on bandwidth and other constraints. So you could, for different, as long as you have a different endpoint associated with a different application, you could do a lot of the stuff they're talking about in the APN discussions for different applications. It supports both segment routing paths, and now we have proposals for native IP paths. Next slide. Flooding optimizations. One thing we found is the IGPs have been very redundant in their flooding. You flood on all interfaces except the one you received on, basically. And we decided, people have had, there's been proprietary extensions to block flooding on certain interfaces for years and years. And it's just kind of, and there's also, and ISIS has had a mesh group where you only flood to, you don't flood to everybody in the mesh group. And now everybody realized that you could have a sparse topology where you don't need to flood to everybody in the entire SPT, and shortest path tree, and in the link state protocols. So we have both centralized and distributed calculation of this of a sparser flooding tree, and that's one set, of disseminating which either the topology or which algorithm is being used to calculate the topology in the distributed fashion. Also, we have some proposals for area abstraction, so that you could take a piece of your topology and completely abstract it. And we have OSPF TTZ topology transparent zone, and we have ISIS topology transparent zone, and now we also have I hate to say it, but it seems like a more straightforward way to do it with area proxy that's a little bit simpler. We also have, in BGP, many of you are familiar with the route reflector. We have a proposal to limit the number of adjacencies over which you have to, establish within an area, with the sort of like a route equivalent to a route reflector. I mean, there's a lot of different things when you're doing it with a link state protocol than with BGP, but that's also some very interesting work. And finally, we have flooding speeds optimization. The old ISO specs for ISIS severely limited the number of LSPs, link state protocol PDUs, you could flood over an interface in say a second. And we have ways of getting feedback, both explicit feedback in the form of protocol encoding and feedback from the network. In other words, how fast the receiver of the LSPs is hacking them to improve this speed and be able to do higher speed bursts and everything, and really speed up the protocol for some of the bigger domains. Next slide. Protocol maintenance, I'm not going to say much more here. We're just, there's a lot of people want to put things into the IGPs at the node, link, and prefix layer. And we have to decide, basically, does this really belong in the IGP? The IGP as an underlay for all the overlay protocols, be it BGP, iBGP, be it Lisp, be it proprietary protocols that use the IGP as underlay. It's pretty critical that it work well. So we look at these, we look at the volume and the frequency that it changes, and we have other ways. Unfortunately, we have other ways to do flooding of non-routing information in separate instances, but we really haven't gotten those deployed. We have the standards, but not deployment. And finally, we have sometimes enhancements to the basic protocol. Like there's like, for instance, this ISI support for additional levels of hierarchy. Right now, both OSPF and ISI support 2 levels, like effectively a backbone and non-backbone areas. But this is for multiple layers of hierarchy with the lower level completely subsumed by the layer above it. Last slide.
I want to throw in something. Use this opportunity to try to attract some attention from other groups. back 2 slides ago, when AC mentioned the flooding speed optimization, that's congestion control, right? So people interested in congestion control, from over in the transport area, basically TCP, right? We're trying to get well, I'd like to see maximal, and I think other people are trying to get maximal flooding speed, right? To maximally use these links to flood. So if that's interesting to you, pop over. It's not just IGP. This is kind of some cool, crossover stuff. That's it.
Last slide. Of course, we got the Yang models, and as Jeff Haas covered in excruciating detail, we're just waiting for this one BFD issue to be resolved, where we didn't want to ship a model that would require the predominant implementations to have a deviation for every instance of BFD configuration. And then we got drafts for all the other things we talked about on the previous slides for augmentations to the base OSPF and ISIS Yang models. And that's it. We didn't lose too many people, even though it went a little late.
No, I am surprised and grateful about that, and
Yeah.
grateful to you too as well for doing this.
I knew Jeff didn't want to follow us, and he had to ask to leave early. So,
well, so we don't delay anyone anymore. Thank you, and we'll see you hopefully in person next time somewhere in Europe. Bye bye.